Okay, friend. Remember, Ted, there's like a 15-second delay from when you say something and they get on YouTube. Guys, the man needs no introduction. You know who Theodore Shoebat is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let him give his talk. He can take as much time as he wants. Invite more people to learn because this man is a mountain of information. And then we're going to open up to Q&A if the Lord Jesus wills. So, brother, it's your show. Take.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Sam. So I want to talk to you guys about the phenomena of, well, I want to talk about several different things. I want to talk about something that I've never really heard anyone talk about, and that is Iran, but everyone talks about Iran, so this is a little bit different. Iran in the context of the rise of Germany and the Persian-Germanic alliance. This is a subject that, I mean, nobody really talks about. There was a German scholar that wrote a book on this subject. His name is Matthias Kunzel, and I've had the time to actually read through his book, and I've been reading it now, and it's just it really is a wealth of knowledge. It's about really the history of Iran and Germany, and how the history of this alliance between Iran and Germany still continues on today. So just to give you guys, just to quickly give you guys the reason why this is important. Germany is the only country in history that has almost succeeded in annihilating the nation of Israel. It's the only country that has gotten close to this. We love to talk about how Muslims hate Jews and how Islam is anti-Semitic or anti-Jewish and how they hate Jews, etc., etc. But the reality is that Jews have been living in the Islamic world for a very long time. Yes, there have been pogroms. Yes, there has been persecution. Absolutely. There has been oppression. But the Muslims have never really gotten close to exterminating the nation of Israel. Germany actually had the objective to exterminate all the Jews. At least with the Muslims, it was taxation. For the most part, the Muslims wanted the Jewish people's money. That's why they had the jizya. They taxed the Jews. They wanted their cash. The Germans, on the other hand, yes, they would take your wealth, but they would also take your life. I'm speaking of the Nazis here. And the Germans, they almost accomplished their mission. They were very close to it. They killed millions of Jews, and they wanted to get rid of all the Jews in the world. Iran today is a country that wants to wipe out the state of Israel. This has been known by everybody since the early 2000s, when we heard Mahmoud Ahmadinejad talking about wiping out the state of Israel. And even, to this day, the Iranian, I shouldn't say Iranians because that would be generalizing, but Iranian nationalists, Iranian Islamists, they talk about dropping a nuke on Tel Aviv and wiping out Tel Aviv. There was a very famous song in Iran. It's called Sohe. I don't know what that means, but you can actually listen to it on YouTube. It has English subtitles. Sohe is spelled Sohe. And one of the lines of the song is that we will drop our Sijili missiles on Tel Aviv. We will wipe out Tel Aviv. And Sijili is a reference to a story in Islamic history of an Ethiopian Christian that wanted to destroy the Kaaba, and supposedly I think it was rocks came down from heaven and stopped them, and they called these the Sijili or something like that. So that's a reference to the Quran. Also within Iranian nationalism and within the Iranian ideology of Shia Islam, they want to destroy and wipe out Saudi Arabia. The Iranians talk about wiping out Israel, but they also want to wipe out Saudi Arabia. So it's not just the Jews that they want to wipe out. The Iranians hate the Arabs. They do. They really do hate the Arabs. It's actually possible that they hate the Arabs more than they hate the Jews. The reasons for this is there's several reasons for this. The biggest reason, though, is the fact that the Arabs conquered the Iranians and forced Islam on the Iranians. There's a lot of literature within Iranian politics against Saudi Arabia. The Arabs invaded Iran, and when they invaded Iran, it was very, very gory. If you ever read about the Arab conquest of Iran, there's the most famous battle in the Arab conquest of Iran was the Battle of Ulais, named after a river called Ulais. And the battle took place near a river. And it was the Persians and their Arab Christian allies versus the Muslim Arabs. And I always find it interesting that there were Arab Christians living in Iran at the time who fought for the defense of Iran. The Persians and their Arab Christian allies were defeated. And once they were defeated, Khalid ibn Walid, who was fighting for Muhammad, he was basically the muscle for the Prophet Muhammad. He took the Christians and the Zoroastrian pagan Persians and had them all butchered near a river. And they say that the gore was so tremendous, the amount of bloodshed was so tremendous that a river of blood formed near the river Ulais. And supposedly Khalid ibn Walid had to create a canal, had to establish a canal to divert the blood away. It was really, really gory. Let's just put it that way. So the Iranians have to find a way to reconcile the fact that they are Muslim and that they're Muslim without the taint of Arabism. Because the reason why they're Muslim is because of the Arabs. At the same time, though, they hate the Arabs for what the Arabs did to them. So how do they reconcile their Islam with the fact of history? And this has been a major point of contention within Iran for a very long time. This is why many Iranians, even within Iran today, are not even Muslim. People think everyone in Iran is Muslim. Yeah, they're all reading the Quran. They're all praying 5 times a day. No, within Iran, there are many nationalists, and there are many people who really don't want Iran to be Muslim. Within Iran, there are 2 paradigms that the mullahs try to harmonize, but at the same time, there is contention between these 2 paradigms. One is called the Persianate or the Iraniyat, which is the idea of Iran. This is really the ethnic linguistic paradigm of Iran, really just Iranian nationalism. And then there is the Islamiyat, which is Islam, the system of Islam within the context of Shia Islam. And the mullah apparatus in Iran tries to synthesize the 2. It tries to create a syncretism between nationalism and Islam. And this is really the main consensus within Iran. Yes, we can be proud Iranians, but at the same time, we are Muslim. But then at the same time, there is a huge faction within Iran that, is Muslim, but at the same time, they emphasize more on nationalism than they do on the Islamic religion. We even saw this in the Mahmoud Ahmadinejad government. For example, Ahmadinejad wanted this ancient artifact from Persia called the Cyrus cylinder. And the Cyrus cylinder, it's an ancient artifact from the time of the emperor of the Persian Empire, Cyrus. And it talks about how the gods Bel and Nebo chose Cyrus to be the emperor of the world. And for this cylinder is located in England, right? It's in some museum in Great Britain. But the Iranians in the early 2000s, they were begging the British to bring the cylinder back to Iran. The British were hesitant to do so, but eventually they gave in, and the cylinder was brought to Tehran as a part of like a museum, like an exhibit. And Ahmadinejad did a speech in honor of the cylinder, and he said that this cylinder is really it's like a plan, or like it's like a model by which every leader of the world should follow. And he also said, and I'll read to you what he actually wrote. I have it right in front of me. He said here that the cylinder is a standard by which all rulers and kings in the history of mankind must be measured. And in this statement, in this cylinder, it literally says that Marduk searched the world for the perfect ruler and he chose Cyrus. Now, when Ahmadinejad said this, the Ayatollahs, the mullahs, they were upset about this because they didn't like the idea of their president, the president of Iran, praising some pagan artifact. But what does it really reflect? What it reflected was the reality of nationalism in Iran. And it reflected the fact that this nationalism goes beyond Islam and that it truly is an expression of the Iranian resistance against Arabization. It's against Arabization. So yeah, they'll say, yes, we're Muslim, but they will do things and say things that distinguish them from the Arabs. And this enthusiasm, this adamancy about being against Arabization and being a proud Iranian is so strong that the president of Iran himself, Ahmadinejad, will praise an ancient pagan artifact because it comes from Persia. So one thing that we have to keep in mind when we're talking about Iran is that it's not just Muslim, it's also ethno-nationalistic. In that famous song that I told you guys about earlier, Sohe, it says in this song, as long as the divine spirit resides in this soil, meaning the soil of Iran, we will not allow our enemies to sleep. And then it goes on to say, we will rule from the Kaaba, we will essentially take over Saudi Arabia, and we will wipe out Tel Aviv. We're going to wipe out the Israelis. So here we have ethno-nationalism. We have an aspiration to destroy the nation of Israel. What we have here is Iranian Nazism. That's really what this is. It's Iranian nationalism, which can escalate to Nazism. Why is the country of Iran even called Iran in the first place? The reason is because, see, originally it was called Persia. What happened was when Hitler rose to power, the Iranians loved Hitler so much, not all of them, of course, but many of the Iranians, enough of the Iranian people loved Hitler so much that the Shah of Iran himself changed the name of his country from Persia to Iran, because Iran is really Aryan, the land of the Aryans. And even the one of the past Shahs of Iran, I think it was Mohammad Reza Shah, he gave himself the title Protector of the Aryans, or Lord over the Aryans. And he even stated to a British ambassador, he stated that the Iranian is no different from the European, and that it was by a sheer accident that Iran ended up in the Middle East instead of being within Europe. When Hitler rose to power, the Iranians loved Hitler. But the thing is that it went beyond just Hitler. The thing is that the Iranian-German relationship began in the 1870s. And the Germans began to do commerce, and this is where I'm going to connect history with the present. The Iranians and the Germans began to do economic ties. They began their relationship in the late 1800s, but they really began to start economic ties in the 1920s. So in the 1920s, the Iranians and the Germans, they began to import and export products between each other. And they made lots and lots of money. And this relationship continued on. And when Hitler took power, the relationship intensified. The economic relationship between Iran and Germany intensified tremendously. And after World War I, the Germans were not allowed to militarize themselves. They were not allowed at all to do any sort of militarism. So they were not allowed to remilitarize for obvious reasons. So what did the Germans do? They went to Iran and they began to build military technology in Iran. This is before World War II broke out. So Germany's remilitarization begins in Iran before World War II. And then when World War II broke out, the Iranians, many of them loved and supported Adolf Hitler. And it's really crazy because the Russians they were blocked out. The Russians needed a way to import weapons, to import military technology from the Americans into the Soviet Union. They couldn't do so because you had the Germans and the Axis powers blocking the entryways, and then on top of that, they couldn't get supplies in from Turkey because Turkey was a neutral country. So the Russians had to rely on Iran as a route by which to transport military technology. This is why, to this day, Russia needs Iran. The reason why Russia needs Iran is because if Russia is ever blocked out in a war, it can't get in supplies from Turkey because Turkey historically has been an enemy of Russia. Russia would have to take in goods from Iran. I have so many things to say. It's just I get stuck here. When during World War II, the Germans, they continued this relationship with the Iranians, but the Americans also wanted to use Iran as a place to build military technology, and the Americans built different factories to build this technology within Iran. But the problem was that there were so many Iranians who were pro-Hitler that they were Iranians who were caught trying to sabotage the factories. So if you fast forward to today, you have NATO countries putting sanctions on the Iranians. But at the same time, you have Germany wanting to continue economic ties with the Iranians, even though the Americans are trying to put pressure on European companies through sanctions not to do business with the Iranians. We had the Iran deal under Obama, and what the Iran deal did was it allowed Iran to have commercial ties with the rest of the world so long as it limited its nuclear production, and it limited that nuclear production solely for the purpose of power, right? Utilizing nuclear power. The Americans pulled out of the Iran deal and then in turn began to pressure European companies through sanctions not to do business with Iran. The Americans began to tell European countries, EU countries, don't do business with the Iranians. The Germans said, who are you to tell us what to do? And it got so bad that the foreign minister of Germany, Heiko Maas, stated that it's time for us to continue doing business with Iran through independent financial channels in Brussels. And then in 2018, Jean-Claude Juncker, who was then the president of the EU Commission, stated in a speech, in the context of America leaving the Iran deal, it is time for Europe to replace the United States. He actually stated this. So the rhetoric coming from Europe is becoming absolutely hostile. And this hostile language was to a great extent sparked by America leaving the Iran deal. So because Germany wants to maintain those economic ties with the Iranians, and the Americans say no, this has sparked hostility between the Germans and the United States. And then at the same time, every time Germany wants to do some sort of relationship with Iran, some sort of economic relationship with Iran, they are Jewish. And this is not, I'm not saying this to be anti-Semitic, but this is just the reality. They are Jewish Zionists within the United States, within Germany, who are very pro-Israel, who lobby against Germany doing business with Iran. And so every time Germany says, hey, we want to, for example, in the early 2000s, Germany wanted to build some natural gas plants within Iran. As soon as the plan was announced, many of the people within the pro-Israel lobby within Germany began to pressure the German government not to do so. And if you look at who in America really pressured America to leave the Iran deal, it was the pro-Israel lobby. I'm not saying this to be anti-Semitic. It's just the reality. The pro-Israel lobby began to say, hey, America do not allow Iran to have some sort of international commerce. So what's happening within Germany is that there is anger not only to the United States, but also to the pro-Israel crowd. And a lot of this is over doing business with Iran. So we see on one side Iranian nationalism. On the other side, we see Germany wanting to continue doing dealings with Iran in the name of being independent from American power. So at the end of the day, this is about Germany wanting national autonomy from the American empire. America is an empire. We sit there and say America is a country. It's just its own little thing. No, America is the Roman Empire of our time. That's what it is. English has become the lingua franca. And if you want to thrive internationally, if you want to thrive economically, you have to do dealings with the US. Bottom line, you have to be on the right side of America. You have to be friendly with the Americans. That's just how it works. And so Germany doesn't want to be under this system anymore. Germany wants to lead its own pan-European EU bloc and run it itself. So what we're seeing on one side is Iran becoming more and more nationalistic, and Iran wanting to destroy its two major enemies, the Jews and the Arabs. On the other hand, you have Germany, which wants to continue economic ties with the Iranians, while at the same time wanting to rebel against the American empire and establish its own pan-European hegemony. And I think what we are seeing is the gradual cultivation of a political atmosphere of very dangerous German nationalism in conjunction with a very dangerous Iranian nationalism. And I'll stop right there. Hello, hello. Hello?
Sorry, yeah. Did we lose you? Did we lose you?
I said I'll stop. No, I'm right here.
Okay, my friend. Sorry about that, because I thought for a second you went silent. We lost your mic. What's happening, my friend? So what do you want me to do for them? Let them ask you questions now?
Sure, yeah, we can ask questions. Or I just want to say also that when you look at German history, you see this pattern of Germans rising up, trying to start an empire, and then being stopped, and then rising up again. You've seen this at least twice, but you also see you see smaller examples of this in ancient history where the Germans tried to start their own empire in antiquity, and you had even an ancient German empire that spanned it all the way to the Balkans. So this is something that's very historical, has deep historical roots. But then at the same time, Iran also wants to revive its empire. Iran had an empire. Everyone knows this, ancient Persian Empire. And so the Iranian nationalists also have their own dream of reviving that empire. It's not just about Islam. It's also about power and empire. And I think that this German-Persian alliance, because historically speaking, we saw it in the alliance between Nazism and Iranian nationalism during World War II. My point is that I think we could be seeing the revival of this relationship come again. That's what I believe.
Okay. Guys, if you have questions on this topic or something related, ask it now, and I'll share it with Ted. So anyone with questions, just share them, and I'll put them there, and he can answer. Let's see. We're just waiting for some questions to come on. All righty then. I'm just recovering. I'm a little under the weather myself, but by the grace of God, we'll get better. Okay. Elmer, how does he understand the rise of Iran as a reference to the prophecy in the book of Daniel regarding Iran being part of Babylon?
Yes. That's a good point. So I wanted to address this, but I didn't want to say it off the top of my head because I can't remember the verses, but I do have them in front of me. So if you go to Isaiah chapter 21, right in the beginning, I'll read to you the verse. It says, "Go up, O Elam." Elam is in ancient Iran. It's in Iran today. Go up, O Elam. Besiege, O Media. All its sighing I have made to cease. And then as you read the chapter, going all the way into chapter 22, it speaks about the destruction of two people. It speaks about the devastation of the Jews and the devastation of the Arabs. So if you go to, for example, in Isaiah 21, verse 10, it says, "O my people, O my people, Israel, the Jews, crushed on the threshing floor. I tell you what I have heard from the Lord Almighty, from the God of Israel." So it speaks of the Jews being crushed by the Persians. And then if you go into verses 13 to 15 of Isaiah 21, it says, "In the forest in Arabia you will lodge, O you traveling companies of Dedanites, inhabitants of the land of Tamia. Bring water to him who is thirsty. With their bread they met him who fled, for they fled from the swords, from the drawn swords, from the bent bow, and from the distress of war." And then in chapter 22, it states, "Elam, Iran, bore the quiver with chariots of men and horsemen." So and then it says, this is really interesting. It says, "It shall come to pass that your choicest valleys shall be full of chariots." So it's speaking to Israel here. So God is telling the Jews, your choicest valleys shall be full of chariots, and the horsemen shall set themselves in array at the gate. God removed the protection of Judah. And then it says to the Jews, "You looked in that day to the armor of the house of the forest." Now, what's the house of the forest? The New Living Translation renders this verse as, "Judah's defenses have been stripped away." And the Jews in Israel today, they love to pride themselves of their military technology, and they talk about having this. There's a term that they use in their military. It's it's where they basically it basically intercepts missiles from coming in. It's called the Iron Dome. That's what it's called. And Israel loves to boast of its Iron Dome mechanism, in which it can intercept missiles. But even if you look at the last conflict that Israel had with Hamas, the Iron Dome could not intercept all of the thousands of missiles that Hamas launched. So the Iron Dome is not as good as some people think it is. And God is saying, I'm going to cut off your defense mechanisms. I'm going to cut off your defenses. The Persians are going to come. You're going to be crushed under the threshing floor. And then also, if you look into, and I wrote this down as well, if you look into Daniel talks about how he saw the iron mixed with clay. And he talks about how these things don't mix. And when you look at the actual verse, this is from, I'm trying to remember the exact verse here, but this is in the book of Daniel. And it talks about how the iron and the clay don't mix. And it states that if you actually look at the
Daniel 2, right?
If you look at the Hebrew literally, the Hebrew word that is used for "do not mix" is Arabize. That's what it signifies. So the iron and the clay do not mix because they don't Arabize. And if you look at the Iranians today, they don't want to Arabize. So this is in Daniel chapter 2, by the way. So you look at Daniel chapter 2. If you look at the Strong's Concordance, the term that it uses is ma'arab. Ma'arab literally means Arabization. They do not mix. They do not ma'arab. They do not Arabize. They don't become Arabs. That's what this actually means. Daniel chapter 2, verse 41, if you want to be. And then also verse 43. Just go to chapter 2 and you'll read it.
How about this one? Can you expound on Iran-Aryan connection?
Yeah, definitely. This is a really interesting topic. I actually wrote earlier this year, I wrote an essay on this subject. Very, very fascinating subject. So when you look at the Iranian language, Farsi, there's a lot of Arab words in it, but they are also words in the Farsi language that have the same meaning and a similar pronunciation to European words that you would find in our own English language, like mother, brother. You'll find words, the words used for mother and brother in Farsi are very similar. I think it's like matar, boratar, something like that, but same meaning and very similar pronunciation. The Farsi language is an Indo-European language. It's an Indo-European language that became Arabized. And if you look at the ancient Iranian world, it wasn't just in Iran. It went all the way into Afghanistan, all the way into ancient India. Remember, Iran historically borders with India. It borders right with India. We say, oh no, it borders with Pakistan. Pakistan did not exist until like 1948. But before that was India. And so even in the Book of Esther, it speaks of the Iranian Empire as going all the way into India, because it did. It went all the way into India. And if you look at the ancient Hindu religion, you go back to those super ancient Hindu gods, like I don't remember their names, but you will find these deities in ancient Persian religion. And that's because in far antiquity, we're talking maybe 4000 BC, these Indo-Iranians, they went right into India and they mixed with the native population. The native population of India were more so like the Aboriginals of Australia. They would intermix with these Aboriginals and they created a new culture, kind of like what happened when the Spanish invaded the New World. And the religious ideas of the native population would sort of mix in with the Indo-Iranian religion, and eventually it evolved into what is today called Hinduism. But it's established that the ancient Iranians were indeed Indo-European people. Even if you look at these within the Zoroastrian text, Zoroastrianism being the religion that Iran had before Islam, it talks about how the Iranian deity Ahura Mazda, which literally means the truth, spoke to the prophet Zoroaster and told him, do you see all these lands? And he shows him Iran, he shows him Afghanistan, and he says, these are the lands of the Arya, the lands of the Aryan. And Zoroastrianism didn't originally come from Iran. It came from Afghanistan. It came from Bactria, which is today Afghanistan. And they're a fascinating thing. If you look at one of the most read scriptures in the Hindu religion, the Rig Veda, they are rivers, they are territories that are specified in this Hindu scripture that do not exist in India. They exist in Afghanistan because that's where the Aryans traveled. When they came in, many of them came in from Afghanistan. And they brought in their religion. They also established copper mining. They also established a new form of architecture. They completely revolutionized and changed the culture of ancient India. So yes, I could talk more on the subject, but I'll stop there.
Okay, folks, this is the time for you guys to ask questions. If you have more questions, feel free to ask. Or you're going to have Ted shut down and resume what he does. Any other questions? Okay. Hold on. There's another question.
Probably a bunch of people. There's probably some people upset.
I don't know. I hope not. You didn't say anything. You're just stating facts. Thank you. Have you studied the connection of land of Gomer and Germany? Is there any connection? Gomer and Germany? Only in that Gomer was a son of Japheth and the Germans are the descendants of Japhethites. I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure the Gomerites settled in Anatolia in ancient times. Supposedly the Gomerites were redheaded, is what I've heard, but they would settle in Anatolia, ancient Turkey. I'm not entirely sure from which son of Japheth the Germans come from. Some people think they came from Ashkenaz, which Ashkenaz is a term that's used by the Jews today to signify Germany. So I'm not entirely sure which son of Japheth, but the Germans are definitely Japhethites. Now, I don't know what this guy is trying to get at because his English is not that clear. It's not that eligible.
Yeah, he's saying that Zoroaster came from a Kurdish background. That may be true. I don't know. It doesn't really matter because the Kurds are Japhethite. The Kurds are Indo-European, probably more so than the Iranians. I think maybe they have less Arab blood than the Iranians do. But it doesn't really matter to me because if you look at Iranians, Kurds, Afghans, they're all related. They all have a relationship. They all have ethnic roots. that they share. So that may be true. But what I read, and years ago, I remember I read a book on ancient. It was on the book on who were the ancient peoples that and from which son of Noah did they descend from. It was written by a British scholar by the name of his last name was Rawlinson. William, I think his name was it Robert Rawlinson? I don't remember. William Rawlinson. Anyway, he wrote a book called The Origin of Nations, which was an amazing book. And in this book, he talks about the prophet Zoroaster, and he says that Zoroaster was a man who came from Bactria. But this person has a different opinion, and that's fine. It doesn't. It's irrelevant to me, though. It doesn't really change the fact of the Indo-European lineage of these people. Okay.
Any other questions, guys? Now, come on, going once, going twice. You guys got to ask. Yeah. Hey, Xerta Kirdum, let me know if I should block you now or 10 minutes from now.
No, it's okay. He's just saying, I read his comment here. He says Kurds are indigenous of I mean, it's fine.
That's what I'm saying. Your focus is not on that. He wants to wax eloquent, sound intelligent.
Is he Kurdish? Is Zorte Kurdish?
If he is, I hope he doesn't tell many more people that he's. No, I'm just kidding. All right. Here's a question for you. Iran versus Saudi is primarily a Persian versus Arab conflict or a Shia versus Sunni. Why are they?
It's both. It's both. It is Shia versus Sunni. But at the same time, you see, many times religious conflicts on the surface they're over theological differences, but at the root of it there are grudges, there's past conflicts that cause a rage and an anger that live on for centuries. So for example, you could look at the Catholic versus Protestant conflict, right? It's been going on for hundreds of years. Now, Protestants and Catholics aren't really killing each other anymore. They were killing each other in Northern Ireland just decades ago, but that has stopped. And most likely, I mean, there is a chance that that conflict could revive again. But if you look at the Catholic versus Protestant conflict in Northern Ireland, the Catholics and the Protestants would say, "Oh yeah, we're Catholics, they're Protestants, blah, 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 we hate each other." But these people weren't really killing each other because this guy says the rosary and this other guy doesn't. At the end of the day, it was over territory. It was over. It was also over the fact that the English had persecuted the Irish, and there was not really tribal. It was really a racism that played a role. Iranians versus Arabs. When the Iranians were at war with the Iraqis, and I did a video about this yesterday, the Ayatollah Khomeini, he took the Arab enemy, he took the Iraqi Arab Sunni enemy, and he made that enemy into Yazid, the one who murdered Ali, the butcherer of the Sunnis. And the holiest site in the Shia religion is a city called Karbala, which is in Iraq today. It's the holiest site of the Shia. And what the Khomeini did was he said, by fighting these Arabs, we are fighting for Hassan and Hussein. We're fighting for Ali. We're going to liberate Karbala from the Sunnis. And so he took the religious conflict between the Sunni and the Shiite, and he translated it into the Iran versus Iraq conflict. But at the same time, though, the Iranian versus Arab hatred, it has historical roots. It's in the fact that the Arabs, when they came to Iran, they butchered the Iranians by the thousands, and they forced Islam on them. And so the Iranians were originally Sunni. They were originally Sunni people. But to distinguish themselves from the Arabs, they have these different rituals. For example, they do Ashura, which all Shiites do. They cut themselves, they beat themselves for the sake of Ali. But you see, when you actually study Ashura and the roots of Ashura, what you find is that it's pre-Islamic in nature. Ashura has nothing to do with Islam. It doesn't come from Islam. It doesn't. It does not come from Islam. If that were the case, how come you don't see Saudis doing this? How come you don't see Palestinians doing this? How come you only see one faction of Islam doing this? It's not accepted amongst the majority of the Muslim world. By majority, I mean 80% of the Muslim world does not accept this ritual of self-mutilation. There is archaeological drawings that you can find from the ancient Iranians that shows Iranians cutting their foreheads at a funeral. You can find this in China, for example. They were ancient Iranians who lived in China. And they would always cut themselves. They would cut their foreheads for the dead. It's very interesting that the Bible says do not cut your skin for the dead. This gives you an idea of what the Bible is talking about. And the Iranians cut themselves for who? They cut themselves for dead people. They cut themselves as a form of mourning. So the Ashura ritual is something that comes before Islam. It was being done by the Iranians before Islam, but the Iranians continued this type of ritual. Who really popularized Ashura in the Shia world? It was an Iranian dynasty called the Buyids. The Buyids would control Iraq. They would control a huge chunk of Iran. And the Buyids were the ones who began to really popularize this ritual. And they began to say, cut yourselves for the cause of Ali, cut for the cause of Hassan and Hussein. This was a continuation of the pre-Islamic Iranian religion, pre-Islamic Iranian culture. The Iranians today also celebrate Nowruz, which is the Iranian New Year. This is, again, a pagan celebration that celebrates the springtime. This was done by the pagans. In Iran today, they still do a celebration for the fire. Or again, before they were Muslim, these people were fire worshippers. And you will see videos on YouTube of Iranians making these little fires and jumping over them. This is all a way to resist Arabization. Anyway, I'll stop there.
Okay, here's this question, and then I got one to follow up. Where is Iran getting the money to support all their proxies?
I don't know, actually. The Iranian government funds all these things. It's kind of like, where does America get all the money to fund its proxies? Tax dollars, I guess. Oil money. I'm not entirely sure.
Iraq was once part of Greater Persia, but now it is completely Arabized. Do Iranians still consider Iraq as part of their legacy?
Well, for one thing, it's not completely Arabized. They don't speak Arabic. That's for one. And they still, as I said just now, they still observe Iranian festivities that are forbidden. Types of festivities that are forbidden in Islam. And there's still a huge rage against the Arabs. And there's still a lot of resistance to the idea of Arabization. But to answer the rest of your question, do Iranians still consider Iraq as part of their legacy? Yes, they do, because the holiest site of their religion is in Iraq. When the Iranians were at war with the Iraqis in the 1980s, the Iranians, they began to do this operation to liberate Karbala. They wanted to liberate Karbala from Iraqi control, from Sunni control. And they failed. And around, I want to say maybe 10,000 or so Iranians died trying to fight for Karbala, and they lost. Do you know how many Iranians died in the war with the Iraqis? 1 million Iranians died in that war. 1 million people died. It was horrific. But in the middle of the war, I think around 2 years after the war began, Saddam said, okay, let's stop the bloodshed. Here's my terms of peace. Let's have a truce. And the more pragmatic people within the Iranian military said, let's take Saddam's deal. Let's accept his truce. Let's end this war because too many people are dying. And the mullahs, the fanatics, they said, no, we have to continue the war. We have to liberate Karbala and all this nonsense. And the war was prolonged for another 6 years. 1 million people were killed. Now that Saddam Hussein is no more, what have we been hearing about within the last decade? We've been hearing about Iran in Iraq. Why? Because Saddam is no longer there. Saddam was the one keeping the Iranians in check. Now that Saddam is gone, the Americans are nonstop talking about Iran and Iraq, Iran and Iraq, Iran and Iraq. So now Iran actually has expanded its sphere of influence thanks to the Iraq war. And now you have all these Iranian proxies in Iraq. And now you have one of Iran's biggest proxies, Hezbollah, probably Iran's biggest proxy, and they just recently launched missiles into Israel. So of course, yeah, Iran definitely wants to control Iraq.
This question is: Nazis claim themselves as Aryans. Why?
Because so this goes back a long ways, but before Nazism even took power, I want to say at around within the 1800s, I should say, in 19th century, there was a huge fascination with, who are the European people and where do they come from? Who were their ancient ancestors? And so there were these linguists who began studying Sanskrit text. So they began to read the Hindu scriptures and things like that. And they began to realize, well, if you look at Sanskrit, and this actually even began in the 1700s, Sanskrit is very similar to German, very similar to English, very similar to a lot of European languages. So they began to say, okay, Sanskrit was kind of like the mother language of the Indo-European languages. And they read the Hindu scriptures of how it spoke of these people called the Aryans, the Aryans, who would invade India, and they came from Iran and all these things. So the Nazis, the French, believe it or not, they at one point, I want to say in the late 1800s or so, the French began to tout this idea that the French were they were the European people today that were closest to the Aryans. The Germans came out because there was that Franco-German rivalry. The Germans came out and said, no, we are the people closest to the Aryans. So the Nazis, they considered the Germans to be the people closest to the original Aryan people who would come from Iran. They would come and they would go into India. They would come from Afghanistan. And that's why during the Second World War, the Germans said Iranians are Aryans. We are related. And the Iranians believed this wholeheartedly. And what happened was the Germans capitalized on this fact and began to say Iran is our ally. And the Germans did this with the hopes of using Iran as a proxy against the British and the Soviet Union. So I'll stop there.
This other question is, you mentioned Iranian jump the fire during that festival. Coptic Orthodox in East Africa do this jumping the fire during St. John festivities. Any pagan relation to this?
I've never heard. I have to look that up. I've never heard of Coptic Christians doing. Do they do this? I have no idea. I've never heard of this before.
No idea.
So the Iranian fire ritual. There is a term for this. It is called. It's called Chahar Shanbesuri, and this is something that goes back thousands of years. I'm not entirely. I don't know. I don't think so. I have to look. I would have to do more research on it, but I doubt it.
Yeah, that's we'd have to look into it. Guys, any other questions? You can ask questions that have some relationship to the material he covered. So feel free to ask. This is your time. If you're out of questions, that means we're out of time. So I'm just looking to see if there's any relevant questions. Aryanism is under. Yep. So far, everyone seems to get it. Okay. What is it saying, Dennis? If you can ask your question, go ahead. Sorry, guys. I'm a little under the weather. I'm recovering. You guys.
You look a little off today.
Yeah, because I don't know. I thought I had COVID, but it seems like I don't have COVID. But I went to Missouri and I got sick over there.
Missouri?
Yeah.
Did you wear a mask?
No. What it was is indoors, the air condition was freezing cold. I had to wear a jacket. Outside was humid, and I was walking just to keep my weight down, not to gain weight, and I got sick. So hopefully I'm
probably what it is.
Say it again?
That's probably what did it. I doubt, maybe it's probably not COVID. So Murat Tanyel has a question.
Where'd you see him?
How is Iran's relation to Turkey?
Yeah. There you go. Okay. And you want to answer that? Hey,
I
like your son, Murat, but go ahead.
It's a little bit it's a strange relationship because they have a rivalry, but at the same time, there is this, I've noticed this interest within Turkey and Iran to have an alliance together. And a Turco-Iranian alliance would be extremely dangerous because both are regional powers. If they unite, they would be unstoppable, really. So, but at the same time, though, there is a fear within Iran of a growing Turkey. So maybe Iran wants to make an alliance with Turkey because they fear Turkey. So they say, well, why not join them if you can't beat them? So, for example, recently Turkey was involved in a huge proxy war in the South Caucasus. Armenia had a war with Azerbaijan over this little region within that technically is a part of Azerbaijan. It's called Nagorno-Karabakh, also known as Artsakh. The Armenians call it Artsakh. And the Armenians say that historically this belongs to Armenia, and historically Armenians have always inhabited Artsakh. Azerbaijan says internationally this is our territory. Anyway, they had a war. Turkey allied with Azerbaijan. Not only allied, but just really Turkey was using Azerbaijan as a proxy against their historical enemy, the Armenians. And Azerbaijan won because Azerbaijan had that NATO technology. Armenia was using stuff from the 1990s. Armenia was using outdated military technology. Azerbaijan was using advanced NATO weaponry, specifically drones, and tore the Armenians to pieces. Turkey sees Azerbaijan as an extension of itself. And Azerbaijan sees itself as an extension of Turkey. In fact, if you look at the Azerbaijani soldiers, their uniforms have the Turkish flag on it, the Azeri flag and the Turkish flag. And also, when there is a slogan amongst the Azeris, there's a slogan that is within the Azeri government. And it states, in regards to its relationship with Turkey, it states, one nation, two states. So two governments, but we are the same nation, same race, same people. Because Azeris speak Turkish, ethnically speaking, Azeris are Turkish, even though they're probably mixed with some kind of Iranian as well, but they consider themselves Turkish. Azerbaijan is out of all the Caucasus countries, it's definitely it may be the wealthiest one because it has oil. Azerbaijan was one of the most oil-rich countries in the world. The capital city of Azerbaijan is a coastal city, Baku. It's right on the Caspian Sea. So Azerbaijan also borders with Iran. It's right there next to Iran. So when Azerbaijan took the victory for Turkey, Iran said that they were very worried because now we have a Turkish proxy. We have an extension of Turkey right there on our border. So Iran is concerned about a growing, rising Turkey, but at the same time, there is this interest to ally with Turkey. Now, you could say, well, Ted, how did that happen? Turkey is Sunni, Iran is Shia. Turkish Islam is different from the rest of the Muslim world. Turkey was conquered in ancient times by the Seljuk Turks. Seljukians were a Turkic people that came from a much larger Turkish nation called the Oghuz. If you look at the literature or the poetry of the Oghuz Turks, there's one poem in which it says that there are several things in this world that are the most holy, and it begins to list them out. And in that list, it says Hassan, Hussein, Ali. These are some of the most holiest men who've ever lived. This was stated by the Oghuz Turks when they converted to Islam. Turkish Islam is also heavily influenced by Sufism, heavily influenced by the occult, heavily influenced by mysticism. Iranian Islam is actually quite similar. So Turkish Islam is more syncretistic than your nominal standard Sunni Islam that you would get from Saudi Arabia or Iraq. It's much more open. It's more flexible. So the Turks they wouldn't mind making an alliance with Shiite because they don't have this huge attachment to Abu Bakr like the rest of the Sunni world does.
Now, so here you have this question in front of you. Do you see the German-Iranian alliance ever affecting the long, historic German, Ottoman, Turkish alliance? I do not, as their economic refuge flow relationship stronger than ever.
Do you see the German-Iranian alliance ever affecting the long, historic German? No, I don't see that affecting it. I don't see that affecting it at all. Because historically Germany has been an ally to Turkey. When Germany became a nation, a unified nation in the 1870s, I believe it was in 1873, 77, one of the first things that Germany did as a new nation was make an alliance with the Ottoman Empire. And in the 1870s, within that same decade, the Germans also made an alliance with the Iranians. And their thing that I must add is that when Hitler rose to power, they were mullahs who were declaring that Hitler was the 12th Imam. They were Iranians who believed that Hitler was the Messiah. So, people argue, will the Antichrist be Muslim? Will he not? He may not necessarily be Muslim. He may be someone who could be so loved by the Muslims that the Muslims will declare him to be the 12th Imam or the Mahdi. I think the future is going to deeply surprise us.
Here's another question for you. How about Iran and China relationship relating to Revelation 16, King of the East reference end times? Is there any connection, correlation in your view?
I have no idea, man. I don't know. China, I think I don't think China is as powerful as people think they are. I think people overestimate the Chinese. They are entire sectors of the Chinese military that are heavily undermanned, heavily underfunded, and they're not even updated in the most recent military technology. China is a country that has a lot of wealth, but that wealth is not evenly distributed. It's limited to one minority of the Chinese population. If you look at a country like Japan is a much wealthier country than China. Japan, the quality of life in Japan is much higher. The average salary in Japan is much higher. The average monthly salary is much higher than China. I just don't see. I mean, other than the fact that they have 1 billion people, I just don't see how China is as big and powerful as people think it is.
Yeah. Well, I guess we got this blasphemer here saying the Messiah killed himself and loved his daughter too much. Yeah, okay.
I don't know. The Messiah killed himself and then loved his
no, some idiot, some clown.
Is this guy Muslim or what? Are you Jewish? Are you reading the Talmud or the Hadith? Which one is it?
I have no idea what he is. But anyway, both governments are Islamic, right? Meaning Iran.
Turkey and Iran?
Yeah. Not only Iran, Iraq, Turkey. I guess they're all, I guess in this context, He didn't mention, because this was earlier. So I don't know if he's referring to Iran, Iraq, or Iran, Turkey, but all three. Shouldn't we stay neutral and out of it? Sorry if this was, yeah. So if they're all Islamic, why bother?
Bother with what? Like he doesn't want Americans to intervene in the conflict?
I guess, yeah. He's saying, hey, in an indirect, politically correct way, he's probably saying,
let them kill each other.
Yeah, let them just take care of each other.
That's what's going to. Oh, it's I think his comment reflects what a lot of people believe, and that is, America should not get involved in anything. We are seeing, and this gives me an opportunity to bring up a subject that I like talking about, and I think more and more people should be aware of, and that is America's empire is becoming more and more isolationist every single year. So back in the early 2000s, what was it? It was hoorah, invade Iraq, bomb Iran, blah, 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 right? Americans were super excited about this. Why? Because of 9/11. We had 9/11. People were pissed off. Understandably, people were very angered. And so we were like, let's just go to war with all these people and we'll crush them and da-da-da. Well, that wasn't as easy as people thought it was. After trillions of dollars and wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, thousands of U.S. soldiers dead, coming back in coffins. Americans have realized that fighting in the Middle East is not as easy as people think it is. And going to war is not as easy as people think it is. It's kind of like what happened with the Roman Empire. You know, one of the things that greatly weakened the Roman Empire was Rome's own arrogance. I mean, Rome believed that they could conquer the world, and they went all the way up to Great Britain. Well, they chewed more than they could swallow, and that heavily weakened the Roman military apparatus because it forced the Romans to spread themselves too thinly. Then also, you know, the rise of the Jews against the Roman Empire. People thought, oh, you know, these people shouldn't be that difficult to fight. Well, the Jews ended up being a pretty resilient enemy. The Iraq War has really, it truly, I think, devastated, or it ruined America's morale in the idea of the American empire, is really what it did. Americans aren't interested in war. They're not interested in intervention. They're not interested in overthrowing regimes. They're not interested in any of these things. This is one of the reasons why Trump was so popular, because Trump said, America first. Let's focus on Americans. Let's help Americans. Why are we helping other countries? Why are we helping other people? And that was one of the reasons why Trump was so popular. Trump made the Trump administration did the negotiation with the Taliban, and the Americans said, okay, we're going to pull out of Afghanistan. Biden is now completing the policy that the Trump administration wanted to do, which was pull out of Afghanistan. What is going to happen with the decline of the American empire is very simple. The same thing that happened after Alexander the Great died. Different little dynasties, little empires begin to form. So America is the empire of the world. When America isolates itself, is no longer involved in other countries, regional powers will begin to fill in the vacuum left by the United States. So we have already been seeing this clear cut in Iraq. Who's in Iraq right now? Russia, Turkey. Who's in Syria? Russia, Turkey. Who's in Libya right now? The Russians, the Turks, the Italians, the French. They're all in Libya because they want to get their hands on that natural gas. America is getting very close to full withdrawal from Afghanistan. Who's America relying on to fill in the void in Afghanistan? The same country that America has been relying on in Iraq and Syria and Libya, Turkey. Turkey is planning on keeping a NATO military presence within Afghanistan, and the Taliban has been ridiculously successful, taking province after province, city after city, probably committing atrocities. We're not hearing so much about it, but I've heard stories of Taliban fighters going into villages in Afghanistan and saying, okay, if you have a daughter, okay, you got to marry her off to some Taliban jihadi. I mean, I've heard of these stories coming from Afghanistan. And now you have a huge refugee crisis coming out of Afghanistan. Thousands of Afghans, thousands upon thousands upon thousands of Afghans traveling from Afghanistan all the way across Iran, trying to make it to Turkey. Why do they want to go to Turkey? Because from Turkey, they can go to a wealthier country like Germany. And also, the United States wants to rely on Turkey to be a hub for these refugees to come so that they could apply for asylum elsewhere. Many of these Afghans also want to apply for asylum in the United States because they said, hey, we helped the U.S. military fight the Taliban. Give me something in return here because you've abandoned us. Many of the Turks do not want Afghan migrants. In fact, a lot of Iranians do not want Afghan migrants crossing their border. There was even a story I read of the Iranian border patrol opening fire on Afghan migrants, killing some. Wow. There was one story, the worst story that I heard was the Iranian border patrol literally throwing Afghan migrants into a river, and dozens of their bodies were found dead floating in this river. Dozens of people drowned. I read a story of one Afghan migrant who was burned alive by Iranian border patrol. And many people in Turkey don't want Afghan migrants. The Turkish Nationalist Party, the CHP, literally the Republicans, that's what they call themselves, the Republicans, they don't want the migrants. So where does that leave Turkey? That gives the opportunity to Turkey, the opportunity for Turkey to say, our people are not going to be the absorbers of these migrants. We now have to be a force of stability in Afghanistan to bring stability to that region so as to not give the incentive to the Afghans to migrate to our country. So this gives the opportunity for Turkey to expand military presence in Afghanistan. So we're seeing Turkey filling the power void in Syria, Iraq, Libya. Now we're about to see it in Afghanistan. So Turkey is expanding even into Central Asia. The CIA put a report a number of months ago on what to expect for, I want to say, the year 2040. What to expect for the decade of the 40s. And it says that one thing that we should expect is different blocks of power filling up power vacuums left by the United States. And it specifies Turkey as being one of those countries. And it also talks about the rise of Europe, how the Europeans will form their own power block. So expect for the world to no longer be under one pole of power, the American power. Expect the world in the future to be under multi-poles of power, the European pole, the Turkish pole, etc.
Wow. Yeah, we live in some trouble sometimes. Now, here, this is something I'd like to know myself. And interestingly, is a picture of Trump. Yes, the swastika is an Eastern pagan symbol stolen by the Nazis. Anything about the swastika, its origin?
We're really not entirely sure where it comes from, but it's become kind of like it's become this ubiquitous symbol in the ancient world. You'll find it in Mesoamerica. You'll find it in ancient Japan. You find it in the Roman Empire. You find it in ancient Europe. We really don't know where this thing comes from, and there's different meanings that it has. There's even an engraving that we have from the Roman Empire of a gladiator with a shield on it, and on the shield is the swastika. We don't know where this thing comes from. What we do know is that it was something that the ancient Aryans had. It was a pagan symbol. And the Nazis took it they took it as an emblem for their own movement. Does that mean that we should revive the swastika because, oh, well, the Nazis stole it, so we should? What's the point of using it? I don't get it. Like, what would be your reason to use a symbol that is only used today by Hindus or Buddhists? I don't know.
Here's a question related again to the return of our Lord. Do you think the USA is the last empire before the Lord turns? In other words, after you say, because you just mentioned everything around the world will be diversified, and there are going to be pockets that Turkey owns and Europe owns. It's no longer going to be
right
the control of America.
I think
so
it's possible. I'm not entirely sure because I believe the Antichrist is going to form his own empire, and it's going to be pretty powerful. So maybe America will be the last empire that is somewhat civil, but I'm not entirely sure if it's going to be the last empire. I'm not in a place to make that prediction.
Do you think, because now you got me curious, the Antichrist, when he starts his empire, do you have any suspicion? Where do you think he's going to rise to prominence and power? What part of the world? In your view? I know.
I'm not sure. I think the Islamic world, it could be in the Islamic world. It could be, significantly in the Islamic world. I've heard the theory, I've heard the belief that the Antichrist will be someone that the Muslims will accept, that the Hindus will accept, that the Buddhists will accept. It's possible that there will be multiple Antichrist systems, but they will be harmonized together under one banner. I'm not entirely sure. It's just it's a difficult
speculation, because we don't know how it's going to pan out.
There's so many things that haven't been fully understood.
Exactly. Here's a question: did Himmler's
Yeah, he's talking about the Aner. Yeah, I know what he's talking about. Anerby. Yeah.
Discover any of their Aryan roots in Iran prior to and during World War II?
So for those of you who don't know, the Anennerbe. They were a group of German Nazi archaeologists who went around looking for archaeological evidence of Aryan civilization. They went all the way to India. I know they went to Tibet. I'm not sure what exactly they did in Iran, but I do know that they went to India and they were fascinated by Indo-Iranian civilization. I know that they went to Tibet and they found some swastikas there or whatever. They thought, oh look, evidence of Aryan civilization or something. But I'll have to look more into it.
All right.
But I do know that they went to Iran. It says here, so I'll give you the Wikipedia. I just looked it up. I'll give you the Wikipedia statement. It says in 1938, the Anennerbe's president Walter Wust proposed a trip to Iran to study Behistun inscription, which had been created by the order of the Achaemenid Shah Darius I, who had declared himself to have been of Aryan origin in his inscription. So it says here that the inscriptions were recorded atop steep cliffs using scaffolding, etc., etc. Unable to afford the cost of erecting new scaffolds, Wust proposed that he, his wife, and etc., an Iranian student, a photographer, and an experienced mountaineer be sent with a balloon-mounted camera. The onset of the war, however, so they really didn't do much in Iran. They tried to read the inscription by Darius I, but the war broke out and they couldn't do it. So it was but they did definitely see themselves as related to ancient Iranians. In fact, I'll add this real quick. In fact, if you read one of the main books of Nazi ideology, The Myth of the 20th Century by Alfred Rosenberg. Alfred Rosenberg, who, believe it or not, was a German Jew. He was a German Jew who advanced Nazi ideology, which is crazy to me. He said the German people should fight for the god Ahura Mazda, ancient Iranian deity. So I thought that was interesting.
This is interesting. It's not a question, but it converges on how all these religions have something that prepares them for the coming of the Antichrist, because these religions are satanic in origin or influence. All these religions that are not based on the truth of the Lord Jesus Christ have either satanic origin or influence. So you see how these religions are preparing them for this figure, because here it says in Hinduism, people are waiting for Kalki, someone who would bring one world religion. See, they all have it.
And I looked up Kalki on Wiki. It says here, Kalki is described in the Puranas as the avatar who rejuvenates existence by ending the darkest and destructive period to remove adharma and ushering in the Satya Yuga while riding a white horse with a fiery sword. It sounds like the Mahdi. So,
right? White horse and fiery sword. Almost also mimicking and blaspheming the Lord Jesus Christ, because he comes on a white horse with a sword out of his mouth. But anyway, you see that. You see how Satan has his tentacles in all these religions to prepare them for the Antichrist, when Jesus then comes down and destroys them. Guys, any final questions? Sorry, man. Hopefully I'll be better by today in Jesus' name with your prayers. Any final questions? I'll take one or two, and then we'll have him on if he wants to talk about other issues, about end times, or just related to the world as we know it. It's political, economic systems that are preparing for the coming of the Antichrist. Any questions? Let me see. Because there's a 15-second delay by the time I say something, by the time it reaches them. Sorry, guys. I'm under the weather. Hopefully, I'll get better. And as you're asking the question, later on today, William Albrecht is coming on a different topic. I've already got it scheduled, and it's at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You don't want to miss this, especially if you're a Protestant. Invite Protestants for this one. The reason why is because he's going to talk about ancient Marian prayers, intercession of Mary in the church fathers. Let me repeat. He's going to be quoting the church fathers from the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th centuries, where they sought the intercession of the Blessed Mother to pray for the church on earth. Ancient Marian prayers, intercession of Mary and the church fathers. If you're Protestant, you don't want to miss it. And if you know a Protestant, invite them. 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, New York time, Michigan time, Lord willing. Let's see if there's a question. That's not John. That's on another topic. It's about Jesus being God. Let me see. Any other questions? Alrighty. I think there was one from Elmer. Hold on. Let me get it. And then we'll see. Here you go. How Yahudi Iranians feel about Israel and Iran relationship? Are they trapped?
From what I've heard, Iranians Jews living in Iran, Iranian Jews are treated well for the most part. Although there have been, of course, there is discrimination and there is anti-Jewish sentiment. But from what I've read, from what I've heard, they still live in Iran and they have their synagogues and they live a normal life for the most part. But that may change in the future. So I'm not sure. It's kind of like Jews who live in Turkey. You know, what Turks will argue is we have no issue with Jews. We just hate the government of Israel. Or Iranians make the same statement. No issue with Jews. We just hate Israel. So.
Final question. And guys, Nada has been posting the link to Ted's YouTube channel. Go there, subscribe. He already has videos on topics related to this that you're going to enjoy. Lord willing, I'll probably upload some if he gives me permission. But here is the final question. Did the Afghans originally worship fire? Were they also Zoroastrian?
Yes. Yeah, yes, they did. There's been archaeological evidence showing most definitely altars dedicated to fire in Afghanistan. Yeah, and Zoroastrianism was definitely in Afghanistan at one point. Yes. So
what we need
Buddhism was also prominent in Afghanistan.
Here's what we need to do. If you've done any extensive study in Zoroastrianism, or if you want to, I'd really love for someone, maybe you, because I don't know how much knowledge you have, to come and we do an entire session on what Zoroastrianism is, right?
Well, okay, so I'm pretty sure there are Iranians who listen to your channel. If you can find an Iranian who's willing to talk to you, then talk to him. If you absolutely cannot find somebody, let me know and I'll do a whole bunch of research on it and I can come here and talk about it.
Because I don't want someone just to tell me what he's been taught growing up. I want it to be based on solid facts and sources. Because the reason why I think it's important, a lot of liberal, critical biblical scholars who have an anti-supernatural, anti-Christian bias, they say that Zoroastrianism actually influenced the Jews during their Babylonian captivity, and that the notion of punishment in the afterlife is alien to the books of the Bible written before the Babylonian captivity. They say it's only when the Jews came under the influence of Zoroastrianism that they started adapting the belief of punishment in the afterlife as well as eternal bliss. And that's one of their arguments, that Zoroastrianism has heavily influenced the Jews and Christians and their understanding of the devil and of punishment in the afterlife, things that were foreign to the older books of the Old Testament. So this is something we need to tackle because I hear it all the time. So
I've never heard that before. I've heard that Zoroastrianism had a influence on Islam. I've never heard that Zoroastrianism had an influence on Christianity.
Yes. I'll tell you one name in particular made it popular. I heard it before him, like on the History Channel. If you go to History Channel, they have like segments on the Bible. Bart Ehrman. Bart Ehrman is one of those.
Oh, he makes it. Sorry, I never heard that.
Yeah, he didn't invent it. He's simply parroting what he was taught. It's in his book. He wrote a book on death and the afterlife, and he mentions it there. So we need to tackle this. So Lord willing, we'll see. If you guys know any experts on Zoroastrianism, let them contact me. If not, we're going to have Ted take 6 months to study this.
Okay.
So, any final comments? Because we're done.
I'm good.
Nothing. All right. Ted's the man, baby. Ted
Appreciate
and
it.
Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. Subscribe to his channel. Make his channel go viral. And Lord willing, we'll bring him back on with his dad. So God bless you guys. Christ is risen, and do pray for me to fully recover by today. Because, boy, even though I feel better, my voice sucks. Anyway, God bless you guys. Take care.